We got questions about that. Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
Sorry, Gavin, I wanted just, if I could comment about the drugs there, because there has been a lot of extremely unhelpful stories going around on social media. And in fact, myself and Mary only sort of put one to bed there about 7 or 8 days ago about non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, such as Nurofen and over-the-counter remedies. And both the HSE medications safety and the ICGP and the Royal College of Physicians, we're all putting out advisories to our members and helping to advise the public. So just to knock a few of those on the head, if you're dealing with paracetamol, so if you have symptoms and you have a fever or aches and pains, we're advising that paracetamol is the first, so you can take paracetamol in adults up to 2-4 times a day.
Particularly for temperature, yes.
Yeah, so there is no evidence that non-steroidal inflammatories such as ibuprofen, which is over-the-counter Nurofen, cause any harm in otherwise healthy patients. If you're on these types of drugs for a chronic medical condition, there is no need to stop them. In fact, people should not stop any of their regular medications without discussing with their GP, because there's a lot of fake news going out there. Again, the other thing, people are ringing up and they're asking to get a stock of steroids, antibiotics and Plaquenil, because they think if they get symptoms, they should take these to try to prevent themselves getting a worse
Yes, I gather there's been a Russian Augmentin, for example, in the last 10 days.
Yeah, and that's just not true. So we really, we don't want people stockpiling drugs which could cause harm in themselves. The Augmentin is a slightly different issue. We do have a real problem with Comoxiclave, which is marketed as Augmentin. We have extremely short supplies of this in this country. We only have about 2 months for our hospital stocks. And in general practice where I work, Comoxiclave is not a first-line recommended treatment for a lot of the conditions we see, and in particular, it's actually not first-line for pneumonia. There are other alternatives, and we really need to try to preserve our Comoxiclave or Augmentin stocks for use in the hospital. So in the community, just to remind people, the vast majority of people who stay in the community who get this virus, they will recover by themselves. It'll be like the normal flu-type illness that goes around. You don't need to do anything other than stay at home and rest and fluids and practice self-isolation. They absolutely need to watch out for if they start to get short of breath, particularly it will happen in the second week, and if they get short of breath, they need to talk to their doctor, not to take medications. They need to talk to their GP. If it's out of hours, talk to an out of hours doctor. If it's an emergency situation and they really feel they've suddenly become extremely short of breath, they need to dial 999. Do not try to take any of these remedies that are going around on social media. This is where the decision needs to be made. Do you need to go to hospital? And in hospital, it's predominantly oxygen and fluids that people are being treated with. There are some other medications, Mary might want to go into those, but they are for hospital treatment only.
Mary, can you take us through this in as much as we can on air? Because for people who are going to get the virus, and there are going to be a lot of them, it's the prospect of getting ill that frightens them. At least if they had some understanding of what will happen to them when they go to hospital, it might allay their fear somewhat.
So just to reassure everybody who's listening, the hospitals throughout the country have been preparing for this since January. There are pathways into which, when you come into a hospital, how you're assessed and where you go to. Fortunately, the majority of those that need to be admitted to hospital do not end up in the intensive care unit, but those intensive care facilities are available, and the intensive care doctors, infectious disease and respiratory doctors are all there, trained up to deal with you in the event that happens. At the moment, the way a patient is treated within hospital is what we call supportive care. Because we don't have any specific medications or indeed vaccines for this virus, supportive care means oxygen, fluids, ventilator support, in other words, a machine to keep your breathing going if that is required. The frontline doctors are all, who are consultants and our trainees, are along with our nursing colleagues, are skilled in ensuring that they monitor people closely, and if they require additional support for their lungs, they will get it. This virus particularly affects the lungs and can cause lung failure, and that's why you need that support.
So the main difference between, we'll say, if they went to hospital with pneumonia under any other circumstances, there isn't a barrage of specific antibiotics, for example, that you can hit this virus with.
That's absolutely correct. We do not have a drug that specifically targets this virus and prevents it from replicating. There are, and this is why it's very, just picking up on what Kingston said, it's really important that we do clinical trials, because we need to make sure any drug that looks like it's promising, firstly, that it's safe to use, and secondly, that it works. And the only way of doing that is by clinical trials. And the universities within this country have been speaking, are getting involved in clinical trials, so we can do the proper science around it, so your lungs to keep them working.
I'm going to change gear completely from the frightening scenario for many people of hospital to some of the more mundane issues outside of hospital. And we got a lot of questions about this actually. The first time we asked people to put in their questions was about animals, for example, and their fear that they might pick it up from other animals, particularly from household pets, many of whom are acting as a company for those who are in self-isolation. Kingston, can you put this to bed once and for all? There's no evidence that dogs pass it on, isn't that right?
That's correct. I mean, coronaviruses can infect animals. In fact, this is thought to be the origin of this current virus. It was thought to come from bats or from other species in the markets in China, dogs. So you're unlikely to get it from your family pet.
People asking, for example, about the use of a car or not, as the case may be, asking that if you're referred for testing, many of the testing centres are drive-in centres. If you don't have a car, how do you use one of these centres?
Well, clearly everybody's not going to have to use those centres. There are other ways, and I think, and again, the medics might be able to answer this better than me, but I understand that the ambulances will come to the house of the people if the people cannot go to a drive-in centre.
Nuala and Mary, a question. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
I could answer that actually. So obviously there are a number of people, not people without a car, but if you have somebody who's a resident in a nursing home,
yes.
you have somebody with a severe disability who driving to and being tested in a car just wouldn't be appropriate. So we do have a mechanism for that. So we have trained paramedics who will do a visit to the home in particular circumstances. Obviously that takes a lot more time and a lot more use of frontline personnel. So ideally the reason with the drive-through test centres is that we can process a lot more people faster, and by doing it, sometimes it sounds odd to be doing it in the car, but obviously then you don't risk contaminating and having to decontaminate rooms where testing is done. Yeah.
I'm 74 years of age. I'm a regular driver for a Meals on Wheels service. I'm in reasonable health, but should I continue driving and delivering?
I might take that one. I mean, I think it's like the others, or a lot of the other scenarios here. There's no reason why you shouldn't do that, but I think what you need to just think about when you go to the house, and if somebody knows that you're coming, what you can always do is you can leave the meal on the doorstep, ring the door, and then step back a couple of feet, make sure that somebody answers. So if you practice your social distancing there, again, there's no issue.
Kingston or Mary, you might be able to answer this. Is it correct that many people who get coronavirus have a lack of a sense of taste or smell as a first or indeed an only symptom?
Sorry, go ahead.
I can answer that. Again, this in the context of this being a very new virus, reports coming out, but there have been reports from Korea saying that about 30% of people lose their sense of smell and taste. That's similar to other viral infections that we see that happening. It probably happened to most of the listeners. but it may be just something we might consider when people present. But again, because it's evolving, these reports are just coming through now, and Kingston may be able to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few reports suggesting that people were actually losing the sense of smell and taste before they had other symptoms, which was remarkable. And then on the scientific level, the potential explanation for that is that the olfactory bulb, which is an area that lies just above your nose going into the brain, it can get infected with viruses, and it is possible that the virus is going into that area and temporarily affecting the nerves. So there is a scientific explanation for it, but it seems like it's a reversible effect, and that people recover their sense of smell and taste when they recover.
Kingston, to go back to almost where we started this discussion on Morning Ireland, and Nuala took the question, the World Health Organization has repeated its mantra of test, test and test. Somebody asking, why is this important? If I suspect I have COVID-19, but I'm not very sick, why clog up the system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is an issue, and that's why clogging up the system, that's why the criteria were changed. I think people that had a sniffle or maybe a headache or a slight fever were asking to be tested when they didn't have really the proper symptoms of COVID-19. The reason WHO
to be fair, they were often being told they needed a test, even though they were probably very reluctant to go and do it themselves.
I think there was also a lot of fear, and people thought that they had some symptoms, they had it, and they would relieve themselves by getting tested until they hadn't. But the trouble is now that they're going to have to wait for several days, over a week, to get a result. The reason WHO have been saying test, test, test is that the best way of containing it, at least in the beginning of the epidemic, was to identify everybody that was infected and everybody that was in contact with an infected person. But when the number, that's fine when you've got small numbers, but when the numbers start mounting up, it gets very, very difficult to do that, because first of all, it's just overpowers the system, and the test that's done, this PCR test, is quite complicated. It takes 24 hours thereabouts between extracting the DNA from the RNA from the sample, running it on this PCR machine, which it's a run of about 4 or 5 hours, and then reporting it. So it's quite complex. Now, there is this antibody test which has been developed, which can be done in 10 minutes. The problem with it is that it will only detect the infection once an antibody response is generated, and that doesn't happen until maybe 5 to 7 days into the infection. The real benefit of this test, and they're now introducing it in the UK, is that it will allow us to identify particular healthcare workers who have been infected and now have antibodies and have recovered, so they can go back to work safely, knowing that they have now got an antibody response against the virus, which, you know, the animal studies are telling us that an antibody response is probably protective. So that is very good news, and I think what's going to happen, what's already happening in some countries, is this assay is being introduced. It takes 10 minutes, this assay, on one tiny prick of blood, 10 centimeters of blood, 10 microliters of blood, a pinprick of blood just on a strip, which it's like doing a pregnancy test. So it is, I think, going to be an additional weapon in terms of not early detection, but in terms of detecting people who had it and then can safely return to work.
Kingston Mills, Professor Mary Horgan, Dr. Nuala O'Connor, thank you all very much for staying with us this morning. Lots of you sent in your questions, and we're very grateful to you for your time this morning and answering those questions. We had so many, we could have spent all day on this, and we will offer another opportunity to listeners to have their questions answered on another Morning Ireland and a Morning